Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. So with that said, that's all the caveat. That's all the, wading through the red tape or the yellow tape, I guess is the right word, to get through to the main point that I want to get to, which is what are the jobs that could actually open? Pete Thamel mentioned 4. I'll add a couple on the back end. But there are 4 that seem like, it's go time. Like you got to win and win and win big or you're going to be out. Let's start. The first one I think is pretty straightforward. Let's just start with one school, because the coach at the AD acknowledged that the coach and the AD are on the hot seat, and that is the University of Nebraska. I think by now everybody knows the story with Nebraska. Scott Frost, chosen son, so excited to have him back, coming off an incredible year, undefeated season at UCF. He's the guy that's going to finally bring Nebraska back to title contention. Just one problem. It's been pretty much a disaster, as Scott Frost is 15-29 overall through 4 seasons. There were NCAA issues, and last year it was just an abomination that I've talked about a lot. I don't need to get into details, but 3-9, 9 losses by 9 points or less, and it just has not clicked. With that said, though, I actually give a little bit of credit to the Nebraska administration. The Nebraska administration basically looked at the landscape last offseason and said a couple things. One, we admittedly want Scott Frost to work, right? He's the native son. He's from Nebraska. He won us a national championship as a quarterback. We want this to work. And 2, we're really, 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 really close. We could have beaten Michigan. We should have beaten Michigan State. We could have beaten Oklahoma. We could have beaten Ohio State. And so rather than tear this thing down and completely start over, let's give this guy one more chance. Let's give him one more opportunity. Let's give him the resources to bring in the coaches that he thinks he needs. Let's give him the resources to be aggressive in the portal, whatever he needs, so that if this does not work out, there is zero doubt that this is not the right guy. He cannot get the job done, and we can move on. And I thought that was pretty cool. Now, obviously, that did happen in part because it's Scott Frost. They want him to succeed. I think Nebraska also looked at the reality of the coaching landscape last year. Obviously, LSU and USC fired their coaches early. Florida fired its coach before the end of the regular season. Miami was later on. And I think they just realized the pool of candidates that we can realistically get probably isn't great. And so because of it, we're going to be patient with Scott Frost. We're going to give him one more chance. We're going to bring him back, and we're going to see what he's capable of. Now, to Scott Frost's credit, we talked about it on the most intriguing teams a few days ago. He did what he was supposed to do in the offseason. He was a winner of the offseason, killed the transfer portal, quarterback Casey Thompson from Texas, O'Shawn Mathis, a defensive end from TCU, Trey Palmer, wide receiver from LSU, Kane Williams, defensive back from Alabama. He did what he was supposed to do in the portal. He did what he was supposed to do with the assistant coaches, bring in a new offensive coordinator, Mark Whipple from Pitt, and now it's go time. And what I would say about Nebraska is, again, they're realistic. They're transparent. I mean, Scott Frost went to Big Ten Media Days and said, I'm not going to give you an opening statement. You know what this is about. You know what's at stake for this program this year. Let's get to work. Tell me what you need to know, and let's get this show on the road. And so I think there's a very good understanding of what expectations are. And if there isn't, by the way, it's been made that way with Scott Frost's contract. I think it's interesting to note, and I have noted it, but for, you guys and girls are busy people. You don't have time to sit through contracts. But Scott Frost's buyout gets cut in half on October 1st, okay? So Scott Frost was, first of all, his salary was reduced, and his buyout gets cut in half on October 1st. And so we're going to find out really quick, not only if he has the, what it takes to turn things around, but if he doesn't, I do think this is a place where they could move early to get a jump on the coaching carousel, kind of like what USC and LSU did last year. Now, again, we will find out early. Not sure if you've looked at the schedule. They play week 0 in Dublin against Northwestern. They play Oklahoma at home September 17th. If they're 2-2 coming out of that, if they're 2-3 after their Big Ten opener against Indiana, guess what? Scott Frost probably ain't making it to mid-October. And so, again, we will find out really quick. But the one thing I will say, you look at this schedule. For years, Nebraska, I think, has had the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. The year of COVID, if you remember, they were trying to play, and I think the Big Ten went out of their way to give them a brutal schedule. This year, that schedule is very manageable. There is no Ohio State on this year's schedule. There is no Michigan State on this year's schedule. There is no Penn State on this year's schedule. Now, they do play Michigan on the road, but their other crossover games are at Rutgers and Indiana at home. They get Wisconsin at home. They do have to play at Iowa. But I'm telling you, this is a schedule built for Nebraska to go like minimum 7-5, 8-4. And I think even with Scott Frost, I think they would take a bowl game. They would take 7-5 and the car care bowl. Like, they don't care. They just want to see progress. They want to see progression, and we will see what happens from here. The talent is there. The administrative support is there. It's time for Scott Frost to prove it. If not, I think not only will he be gone, I do think it's one of those scenarios where he could be gone early so they can get a jump on the coaching carousel. Let's keep it going because the next team is a pretty interesting paradigm in the opposite direction of Nebraska, right? Nebraska, everybody's rolling in the right direction. Everybody wants the same things. Auburn's the exact opposite. And so Auburn is obviously, of the SEC teams, they are the most likely to make a move. And they are the most likely to make the move because they tried to make the move last year. Now, Brian Harson, their head coach, has become kind of a sympathetic figure over the course of the last couple months because of how he was treated. But a few things kind of stand out when I look at Auburn. First of all, part of the reason he's on the hot seat, things didn't go well. And Brian Harson has to acknowledge, and I think he has, that part of it was on him. The reason there was all the uproar and unrest at Auburn in January and February of last year was because of what happened in November and December. They lost 5 straight games to end the season. They lost to teams that Auburn should never be losing to. Mississippi State at home, South Carolina on the road, Houston in a bowl game. They lost the Iron Bowl. It was a great game. They could have won it. But there is a reason that what happened in February happened in February. Brian Harson wasn't good in year one. Down the stretch, they fell apart, and the boosters and the fans were frustrated. With that said, it doesn't make it okay with what happened in February, which I think you all remember. But for those of you who don't, let's get into how Brian Harson almost didn't survive coming into this year, which is pretty straightforward. Brian Harson, late in January, early February, after signing day, he had some problems on his coaching staff. A couple guys go, a couple guys come, all that stuff. The recruiting isn't great. This off a 6-7 season. Well, what happens? We all know those internet message boards start humming. Brian Harson is accused of some stuff. Ironically, all the rumors come out right as he leaves on vacation. And essentially, it led to an independent investigation or an investigation into Brian Harson. It was pretty clear that a select few boosters very much wanted him out and were trying to put him in a position where either the school investigated and found something to fire him for cause, or he would be so embarrassed and frustrated that instead he would just quit and resign himself. Unfortunately for Auburn, they couldn't find anything, and fortunately maybe for Brian Harson, he is back, and I give him credit. He looked all those boosters in the face and basically said, look, I don't really care. You can dig all you want. You aren't going to find anything. I'm the football coach, and if you don't want me to be, you got to pay me tens of millions of dollars to go away. So Brian Harson survived that. And I will say, like, going into this year, there's a few dynamics at play. One, I do think that the guys that are in that program right now, the players that are in that program right now, they have his back, right? They want him to be the head coach. They have his support. But one, what happens if things don't go well early? And then two, more importantly, again, it's almost the opposite in Nebraska. At Nebraska, it's clear the administration wants Scott Frost to succeed, and any incremental step in the right direction. I think 6-6 saves Scott Frost's job. I think 7-5 certainly does. I don't know what the win total is at Auburn to keep for Brian Harson to keep his job. It's worth noting, by the way, the AD who hired him, the AD who took the search away from the boosters and said, I'm making this hire. I'm hiring my guy. You guys aren't doing this. Alan Greene, his contract expires in January of 2023, which is an interesting caveat. It's clear that if they're like, if we can't get rid of Brian Harson, we're going to make sure that you're not back. And if Brian Harson doesn't work out, that we make the next hire, not only with the football coach, but with the AD as well. And so the AD is the AD. We don't do AD athletic director hot seat rankings here, But Alan Greene at Auburn is probably number one on that list. But it does speak to, how kind of crazy things are at Auburn. And then more importantly, I can't even begin to tell you, what is realistic in terms of expectations for him to keep his job. I think for most schools, 8-4, year two in the SEC West, you're doing cartwheels unless you're Alabama or maybe LSU. But at Auburn, I don't know if that's enough this year, and I don't know if they have a good enough personnel, frankly. I think Brian Harson's a fine coach. I just don't think they have the players to survive 12 weeks in the SEC West, plus an out-of-conference game with Penn State, plus a crossover game with Georgia. But what I will say for Auburn, and it'll be interesting, schedule is pseudo-manageable for them early. First 5 games are at home. Now, it includes Penn State, and it includes LSU. But if you're ever going to get LSU, it's this year at home early before Brian Kelly figures things out and potentially gets things rolling. So I think there's a really realistic chance that when we're talking about Auburn, they could be a team that does start the season, frankly, probably 5-0 going into that Georgia game. First 5 are Mercer, San Jose State, Penn State, Missouri, and LSU. I think you need to be 5-0 going into Georgia because from there it gets much tougher. At Georgia, at Ole Miss, by Arkansas, Mississippi State, on and on, A&M and Alabama in the final few weeks. So it's fascinating because this is the one school. I don't know what success looks like. It's clear that at least a large vocal portion of the fan base doesn't want him at all. And maybe 8-4 won't be good enough. Maybe 9-3 won't be good enough. It's just going to be interesting to see how this season plays out and what kind of win total actually wins over the fan base. Just absolutely fascinating. It's always something at Auburn. It is always something at Auburn. Really quickly, the other 2-3 guys that I want to get to. First of all, Herm Edwards, Arizona State. Arizona State is the most dysfunctional program in college football, bar none, college athletics. It's just a crazy place. Let me just set up what is going on at Arizona State. President has no idea what's going on in sports. He inherently trusts the athletic director. Just one problem. The athletic director really has no background in college sports. The athletic director is a former agent. And guess who one of his former clients was? Oh, the current football coach, Herm Edwards. So yes, how did Herm Edwards get this job in the first place? As we all remember, it's because his former agent was the AD who did that. Feels like a little nepotism to me. Feels like there's probably a state law against that. Apparently there isn't, at least not in Arizona. What's especially crazy, though, is everything that has happened since Herm Edwards took over. And to be honest, he wasn't terrible early. The problem was COVID happened, and he just egregiously broke all the rules during COVID. We talked about this with Jeremy Pruitt a few weeks ago, but Arizona State very much got caught bringing kids on campus during COVID dead periods. And the reports are that there was a real big divide between the part of the staff that wanted to do it, the part of the staff that didn't want to do it. But what's wild is this story really came out well over a year ago. It came out in the spring of 2021, and I think there was a belief Herm Edwards ain't about to survive the 2021 season, yet here he is going into 2022 with the job still. The problem, of course, is he's basically lost his entire staff, including defensive coordinator Antonio Pierce, played in the NFL, who was basically his recruiting coordinator, did everything. He's lost all his best players to the portal, 1 because of the NCAA stuff, 2 because ASU is way behind in NIL. But you lose your quarterback, Jalen Daniels, to LSU. You lose your best wide receiver, Ricky Pearsall, to Florida. You lose your best defensive player, Eric Gentry, to USC. And so right now, Arizona State has one of the least talented rosters in the conference. They have a head coach that seems to be like a lame duck guy. And then on top of that, they're obviously not recruiting well because everybody knows that the coach is on the hot seat. So Arizona State, to me, very much feels like a job that is probably going to open up after the season. If they don't officially fire Herm Edwards, my guess would just be that he retires. I just can't see the scenario where he's back next year because you're hemorrhaging players. You can't get assistant coaches because they're not coming to a dead-end job. And it's just a deal where at some point somebody is going to have to act. But boy, oh boy, crazy scenario at Arizona State. And I'd be curious to see by the way, what kind of candidates they could potentially get. Arizona State, a lot of people think is a school, a program that should be operating at a higher level. But as I said, very dysfunctional. I think they're a little bit behind on the booster NIL stuff. And they got NCAA sanctions coming. So it'd be fascinating to see who would even take that job in the offseason. Last couple teams, one, Georgia Tech. I'll say this. I know we're not supposed to feel bad for guys who make $4, $5, $3.5, $6 million a year. I do feel kind of bad for Georgia Tech's head coach, Jeff Collins, who is going into year 4 at the school. Now, to be clear, it's not like I feel terrible for him, and he has not succeeded. 3-9, 3-7, 3-9 entering year 4. Some really embarrassing losses. But what I would say is, it was almost, he has almost been in the midst of a, perfect storm of everything that could go wrong that you can't have go wrong during a rebuild. First of all, the Georgia Tech's one of the tougher jobs in college football. I think most people look at it and say, oh, it's Atlanta. Oh, look at all the high school talent. You're going to have so much success. Bottom line is Georgia Tech is a small school. It's about 16,000 undergrads compared to Ohio State, Wisconsin, whoever, 30, 35, 40,000 undergrads. On top of that, it's a real academic school. It is really hard to get kids in. There's limited majors, and they're not going to just let football players in if they can block, tackle, or run. That's just not how it works at Georgia Tech. But beyond that, look at everything that has happened around Jeff Collins during this, again, almost a perfect storm to the scenario where we are right now, where he is very much on the hot seat. One, he was replacing a former triple option head coach. That, my friends, is not easy, okay? So you have a triple option head coach. He's recruiting completely different personnel than everybody in Power 5 football. You don't really care if your quarterback can throw. You want receivers that can block more than that can catch. You want a smaller, quicker, more athletic offensive line because you got guys in space and you're cutting and you're doing this and you're doing that. Jeff Collins came in and had to completely overhaul the roster because of the fact that, it was a scenario where they had a triple option roster trying to compete, in a traditional way. So you have that happen. Then right in the middle of that rebuild, you have COVID. You're shut down. You miss spring practice. You miss fall practice. You miss summer workouts. Not ideal when you are completely transforming your roster, completely rebuilding a roster from the ground up. And then finally, it's just a tough time to be in the transfer portal because, again, Georgia Tech, and I think I might have talked about this with Vanderbilt at some point, Georgia Tech's one of those schools that if somebody has success and they're not feeling it, they can bounce and leave in this transfer portal era. But it's harder to get kids back, right? I think most schools, fill in the blank, Nebraska, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, if you lose a guy to the portal, well, you can just go into the portal and get somebody else. At Georgia Tech, the academics have to be there. The grades have to be there. There's very specific majors because it is a tech school more than it is a traditional kind of 4-year public school. So really, really tough situation at Georgia Tech. And I don't really see any reason to really think it's going to get better. They obviously lost their best skill position player, Jahmyr Gibbs, to Alabama, and they got a brutal start to the season. They play Clemson in week 1. Now, the game is in Atlanta, but it's not even a home game for them. They have to play Clemson at the Atlanta Falcons Stadium. That is the Monday night, Labor Day game. Then they play Ole Miss in week 3. Then they play at Central Florida in week 4. Then they play the defending champ Pitt in week 5. And then later in the year, they got to go to Florida State, to Virginia Tech, to North Carolina, and wrap with Georgia at home. Georgia on the road. Are you kidding me? So final 5 weeks of the season. Here's their final 5 weeks. At Florida State, at Virginia Tech, Miami at home, at North Carolina, at Georgia. Good luck with that, Jeff Collins. Perfect storm for Jeff Collins, where I don't think he's surviving that much longer. Really quickly, a couple other jobs that at least have my interest. One, I'll say this. Florida State, I think, is in that interesting scenario. Now, they would owe Mike Norvell, their head coach, a ton of money for him to leave. But you got to remember, if you fall too far behind, all of a sudden things change when it comes to the dynamics of realignment, and you don't want to fall too far behind where if the SEC expands, then you're in a situation where, the SEC doesn't want you because you're going on a decade of irrelevance since Jimbo Fisher left. With that said, it is only year 3 for Mike Norvell, 3-6 in year 1, 5-7 in year 2. Showed some significant improvement late in the season. They started 0-4 last year, but got a lot better. But what I would also say is a couple things are working against them. One, lost the best recruit in the country to an FCS school, Jackson State, and an FCS school coached by your most prominent alum ever, Deion Sanders. That is not ideal. And then 2, what I would also say is that the schedule is very interesting because they open against LSU. They technically play in week 0 against Duquesne, but they open week 1 at the Superdome Sunday night against LSU. LSU is very much rebuilding. LSU's over-under, according to the DraftKings Sportsbook, is 6 wins this year. If you lose to LSU week 1, that's a lot of digging out. And again, the schedule is not super advantageous at Louisville in week 3. From there, you then play Boston College, who's improved, Wake Forest, who was the division champ last year, and then at NC State and Clemson. So you lose early to LSU. It could be a snowball trickle-down effect for Mike Norvell and Florida State. If I had to bet, I bet he survives. But he's kind of that Dan Mullen where it's like, oh, it's going to be fine. Maybe Manny Diaz is the better example where even if he struggles, they'll give him another year. In college football in 2022, they don't give you more years if you're not getting the job done. Scott Satterfield's really interesting at Louisville, I should mention. Dino Babers at Syracuse. And one other one that really stands out to me.